Hi there, this is Matt Heffernan. Welcome back to my channel. If you haven't been here before or seen any of the previous videos in this series on the Xci adventure game engine, I would recommend you go back to my channel, subscribe if you haven't already, and go back and watch that first episode in the series and work your way up to this. Or if you just want to skip around, fine. Whatever you want to do, it's great. But this episode is going to be about the music. And hey, if you are the kind of person when you're designing a game, you do the music first, well then, welcome. So here we're going to go right into my personal process of how I intend to make music for XCI games and how I've done it so far. Not every step in this process is what you need, and but we'll talk about specifically exactly what you're going to have to do if you're going to have music in your game. And of course, if it's an adventure game, now, again, if you're new to this series, a little recap here. XCI stands for Extremely Compact Interpreter. It's an adventure game engine for point-and-click adventure games, kind of like how SCI and Scum used to work back in sort of the late 80s, early 90s, 16-bit era, and I'm doing this for the 8-bit retro computer called the Commander X16. And it's really a great opportunity to try to sort of make something a little bit beyond what an 8-bit computer was actually capable of doing back in the day. So for doing music, and of course, yeah, adventure games, I think music's pretty important to that. To do that, you basically, obviously, you got to score things. So you got to actually have some sort of music in mind, and of course, I mean, some kind of ability to compose or at least read music. If this is something you're creating for your own personal use and sharing with your friends, you know, you could go ahead and try using some copyrighted music or just going and doing something public domain, which is what I'm going to show you today. I'm going to take a public domain piece and show you how you make that into a game. But there, you can see here in this little diagram, there's a few steps that you're going through. So once you've actually come up with the music, or maybe the process will show you what the music's going to be, but you have some sort of idea of what kind of music you want. And then I use a tool called Deflamask, which is this little icon right here. That's the logo for it. Deflamask is an open source chiptune tracker. Now, if you're new to the internet, chiptune is the art of taking these sort of old school audio chips, like the Yamaha YM2151, which we're focusing on in this video, and creating music for them that could run on this old music hardware. Specifically, a frequency modulation synthesizer, like the YM2151. And Deflamask supports that chip just right out of the box, and that, of course, is one of the music options, one of the sound options that you have for the Commander X16. It's not the only one, but it's definitely the most capable in terms of coming up with good sounding music. So basically, you track up the music in Deflamask, and Deflamask allows you to then export to a format called VGM, which stands for Video Game Music. Now, this is another open standard, and VGM gets used by a lot of different tools, a lot of chiptune playback and composition utilities. So you don't have to use Deflamask. You could use something else, and then you could sort of reuse somebody else's YM2151 VGM file and go ahead and use that in your own game. You have a lot of flexibility there in terms of how you come up with a VGM file, but that is the actual requirement for XCI, is that you need to get your music into this VGM format. And VGM is a very simple format, and we'll talk more about that later, but it really gets down to the actual hardware interaction, what has to happen in order for this music to get played back. So the software development kit for or SDK for the XCI game engine, the Xci Sdk, or xci.exe, if you will, it takes that VGM file, and everywhere that you specify within your game you want to use a specific VGM file, it will then convert that into a format to be read directly by the Commander X16, which is this logo right here, and it will go ahead and create a very compact binary for the X16 to read and play back in real time for the game. So let's take a little closer look here at the first part of this process, which is the actual tracking of the music with DefleMask. So DefleMask lets you do a few key things which are really helpful and really make this process a lot easier than having to go and just sort of come up with a set of instructions to a sound chip to build music. It's a FM synthesis, which could be its own whole video, is a very complicated process. It's very mathy, and I'm not going to get into any of that mathematics, and I'm not even really going to get into any sort of music theory. But basically, you can define any number of instruments for the sound chip, and DefleMask gives you these tools. So you can see in this little GUI right here, and we're going to see a live demo of that in a minute, of how to set up each instrument, what the actual frequency properties are, all the different FM synthesis parameters that go into that. And then it lets you track that music, which is just notes. So we're taking something like sheet music here, and for our purposes today, we're going to use "Mary Had a Little Lamb" very appropriately. Edison first recorded music by singing "Mary Had a Little Lamb," or more or less really reciting "Mary Had a Little Lamb" for his initial phonograph demo. And we're going to just take that music and go ahead and plug that in, and you can see here this interface in DefleMask. It takes notes, and it uses the standard pitch notation of like here E4, which is this note, and C3, which is this note down here. And you can see this whole sheet music getting tracked here as a set of voices. And then it takes that and converts that to VGM. This is a little hex dump of a VGM file where you can see here in the ASCII readout, it starts with the letters VGM, and then eventually you get down past this header, and you can see these. It comes out as T's in ASCII, because T in hex, an ASCII T in hex is 54. And you'll see 54 followed by two numbers. And here we can see 54, 0, 1, 0, 2. Well, that's every time it sees 54, or it puts in 54, it's saying this is a YM2151 instruction. And first there's the register index. So here in register 1, we are going to write the value of 2. And then immediately after that, we're going to write to register 18 the value of 0, and so on until eventually we're going to get to a point where we're going to say there's an instruction that says, all right, we've written enough to that, and now we're going to have a delay for a certain period of time before we write the next instruction. And that's a part of the standard for VGM, so that you could actually have multiple pieces of sound hardware in your rig, and you're just poking at each of those and then managing the timing at which you're doing all of those little pokes to all the different pieces of sound hardware. And that's exactly the way that we want to be able to communicate with VGM, but we don't need to have all of this falderall of the big header, and it needs to be made to work within the confines of how the X16 works, which is generally everything being driven by the 60 hertz video update refresh cycle. And so that's what Xci does, is it gets it into that format for you. So let's take a look at DefleMask. And how do we do that? Well, first let's take a quick look at the music we're going to put in there. It's a very simple tune. If you've ever played any sort of instrument, you've probably learned how to play "Mary Had a Little Lamb." And we can see here it starts with the E above middle C, and it has a dotted quarter note, and then a eighth note at D, then down to middle C for a full quarter note, and then another quarter note back up at D, and so on. So if we're going to Deflamask, this is what you see initially. When you start Deflamask, you can see here I have it set up to for the system to be a Sega arcade machine. And those Sega arcade machines from sort of the mid to late 80s into the 90s, a lot of them use the YM2151 chips. So this is something that automatically comes with Deflamask. And you notice that they also include the Sega PCM, so often you have some of these old ROM dumps from these arcade machines. They'll have the music within the sort of the FM synthesized version of the music, but then it has sound effects and stuff and samples sort of thrown in. And we're not really supporting that right now with Xci. That may be something that we'll think about adding later, but for right now it's strictly going to be the 8 voices of the YM2051, which we can see here through this F1 through F8. Those are those 8 voices. And we can see here S1, and it gets into S2 and so forth. Those are the sample voices. And so we're not going to be dealing with that. We're just dealing with these 8 FM voices. And then we can see over here in this part the instruments. And by default, it comes up with the most basic sine wave instrument that you can have. And it gives you a little piano down here you can play. So I can say, yeah, ooh, yeah. So yeah, if I wanted to play Mary Had a Little, I'm like, Mary had a little lamb. It doesn't sound too great, but we can start using that right now just to sort of get it all in there. So as recall here, what we can do is put it in record mode, and we can use this little piano to start playing it. So we're going to start our measure right here on that beat with that E, and then it's a dotted quarter note. So what we're going to do is use each of these, use a half beat for each of these lines here. So you have a sustain basically from when you start until the next thing gets played, depending on the instrument. You can set up an instrument to decay faster and so forth, so that it ends pretty quickly. But generally, most instruments are going to sustain until you hit it again. And so then we're going to say here that the D, and then as you remember the C. This was just a 8th note, so we'll do the C right after that, and then another quarter note of D, so we'll just leave one gap in there, and then another gap till we get to here, and we'll see. Yep, we've got now 3 E's, 2 quarter notes, and a half note. So we'll go here, skip one because we're doing a quarter note, skip another for that quarter note, and then that finishes that measure. And we'll play it, and we'll see here. Wow, that was really fast, wasn't it? So what you're going to want to do is play with the speeds here. And what I've found for most of the stuff that I've written, getting the speed up to 8/8 actually makes these sort of a nice mid-tempo 8th note for each of these rows. And then I can play it back. So now the tempo sounds good, but that instrument is kind of messed up. So I'll go ahead and change that instrument. Now here I could just go in, if I was a real FM synthesis guru, and go and mess around with all of these parameters. There is a lot. I mean, it's a lot, and you can sort of, you notice here in Deflamask, you can mess around with GUIs at different levels. So I just turned off recording so I don't start like putting in garbage. But you notice I just changed it by just doing this one little thing, and I could change this even more. And then so forth, like, oh, let's make this down here, and make this go over there. And the changes are pretty subtle, obviously, but in general, you're probably not going to be, unless you're one of those kind of nerds that are into that sort of thing, creating your own instruments. You may want to use this interface to modify them, but I find we just want to load those instruments up. So one instrument that comes with Deflamask. Oops, what happened to my load here? Let me bring this back up again. All right, load instrument, and oh, I see it ended up back there. And you'll see here under instruments it has that YM2151, and there's this electric piano that comes with it. And so that's what I decided to use. And now if I play it back, oh, that's so much nicer. It actually sounds like one of those old electric pianos from the 70s. And so you can just sort of use this process. You can start adding in more instruments. Like here, I'm going to open up a version. Yeah, I don't care. We're going to use the magic of computers and the interwebs. So with just the piano, here we can see I've basically implemented in the track the entire piano part. And so I'm using the same instrument over again, and I'm using up 3 voices because if we look back at this piece, we can see that we never have more than 3 notes happening at once. So, and really not until the second to last measure. So there we go. There's that full piano piece. Now, if you'll look again, you see there's like sort of guitar tabs, just the chords for guitar, organ, or whatever sort of chord-based instrument that you're playing with. If you dig even an accordion, you could use that, however you want to do it. So I figured, well, I'll just sort of fill this out. I'm going to go ahead and use a sort of a nice little acoustic guitar, and that's what I did. I went ahead and created this fully tracked version. Whoops. What happened to my full thing? Oh, you know what? I don't have it in there. That's what happened. Oopsie. Did I really not put everything in there? Okay, well that's a little embarrassing. I had the whole thing. All right. All right, I'm going to have to stop this. All right, we're going to pause this for a second. All right. He came back here. A little bit of background here. I got a new computer. I'm still doing everything on the old computer in terms of creating for YouTube because the new one's not quite set up correctly yet. And that's where I had actually finished this track. So looking back here, we can see that now I've added a second instrument, this acoustic guitar 3. And here they are, 5 more voices, all set up where I'm just playing those chords. And you can see here that this part here shows the volume. So I'm playing the chords at a lower volume than the piano part. And it's just going through and doing those chords all along in this sort of mellow acoustic guitar sound. So it comes out like this. And you'll notice here it'll just repeat over and over again, and that's generally how you have these VGMs play. They just sort of loop over and over, and that's how we're expecting them to operate within Xci, that you made a nice little loop that it can just play over and over and over again during wherever you're putting that music. And then once you're done with that, you can go ahead and do a save VGM. And you can see here in DefLeMask it has output. And I'll go ahead and just say right here in there, I am going to just put something called Mary had a little, lamb. And we'll save that. And it's going to save that as a VGM file. And so now look here in the magic of computers. I look here, and hey, there in my little template directory, I have that Mary had a little lamb.vgm, and not too pretty to look at. It's just binary data. So, but I can go ahead and start putting that into my game. So how do I do that? Well, let's take a quick look back here at the slides. Oops. All right. Now, to add a game, there's a few constraints that you got to consider. Now, the actual total VGM file size, you want it to be under 8 kilobytes. You're going to get a little bit more than that, or a little more headroom than that. But generally, the VGM file is not going to be that much bigger than the final file. So keep it under 8 kilobytes because the ultimate file that we're going to load in, it has to fit within a single RAM bank, and to also consider, it's going to share that with Pcm Sound Effects if you define those for whatever level you're dealing with. And we're in the next episode, we're going to start talking about those sound effects. And in fact, what we'll see is that PCM takes up a lot of space, so generally you want to keep the music part very tight so you can get as many sound effects into each level that you want. But as far as music goes, you only get one piece of music that you can have in each level, and the title screen can also have music. As we can see here in the documentation, the music key is what you use to define what the music is, what the file name is for the music, and you put it in the title screen file or in the level file. And that file name is just the relative location for that VGM file relative to the configuration. And if we look here in the main documentation, I talk a little bit about what VGM files are and how you can actually do it. And it's pretty straightforward. And you see, I haven't even written the sound effects part yet. I'm going to get that part finished before I do the next video. Don't worry. So let's go back to our slide. And yeah, so all we need to do to define what music we're going to have in a level is just use the music instruction and give it the file name. And since we have that file right in here, we're going to be able to go into our level. As you notice here in each of these levels, as we see in the template file, we always have music commented out because we don't define any music in the basic template. And even for the title screen, you can see it's commented out. But we're going to make this music for level 0, which if you watch the previous video or a couple of videos ago, we created a bouncing ball animation. And we'll just go ahead and put this music as the soundtrack for it. So it's Mary Had a Little Lamb.vgm. So we'll save that, and then we'll go ahead and build that. Now if we take a quick look here at the files that it built, we would see here that this file right here that's going to be put into bank 6 when we load zone 0 is that music file, and you can see it got converted to just over a K because the second level, zone 0 level 1, also has a music file, sort of, but it's empty. You can see it's only 3 bytes long, so it just has that 2-byte header and a single byte saying sorry, no music. And so that's how we know we got a good amount of space. If we wanted to add sound effects, which we will in a later video, we'll have almost 7K to work with. So that's enough to do a pretty decent sort of bouncing ball sound, which we'll be doing. But for now, let's listen to what this actually sounds like. So we're going to go ahead and run our game. There's that title screen again, still silent, but now we'll do a new game, and there it is. We're playing that music, and it's kind of soft. We can make it a little louder. Oh, there we go. And you can hear it just keeps looping over and over again. And if we want in the game, we can always go ahead and just disable music and say no, we don't want to hear it anymore, and it goes away, and that little checkbox goes away. Or we could turn it back on again, and there's the music again. So that's pretty much it. That's how you add music to a game. I'm going to go ahead and disable that one more time. So if you're interested in creating your own game and writing music or trying to reuse somebody else's music. I hope this didn't intimidate you too much. I didn't get into a whole lot of music theory or FM synthesis, just giving you sort of the basics, let you know that the tools are out there, and with just a modicum of ability, which is I barely have that, to be able to write music and track it and put it in a game. It's not too difficult, and you can just go ahead and have fun with it, because it's a lot of this sort of retro computing homebrew type thing. It's not necessarily going to be a AAA type game. It's more for the enjoyment of like-minded individuals, and so I hope that if you're ever so inspired by this, that you go ahead and start playing around and creating your own music, creating your own game. Try to use some of these tools that I think make some of this creation helpful. That's the reason I'm creating these videos, the reason I've created this engine. And I hope, especially right now, when you don't have a whole lot to do outside of home, you're probably working from home, if at all, but you can still use your now copious free time to learn something new. Maybe learn how to write some music, learn how to create a game in a very easy way that I've laid out here for you, and have something that when you look back on this time, rather than being, oh, I just sat around and watched TV and I finally caught up with The Wire or whatever. No, I created something, and I have this as something that in the future I can look back and I have this thing that I created. And that's all I really hope that you do. And so please, if you haven't already, while you're safely at home, go ahead and subscribe to my channel. Go back and watch some of the rest of the videos, see some of the demos, the other tutorial videos, and just give it a shot and see if you can try creating something cool for yourself. All right. Well, I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.